I'm outside St Pancras International Station with Frank, who you remember from years ago from the podcast we did with him. He was known to run guns back in the day, did his time, now he's a public speaker and he's doing a tour. And what is this tour about, Frank?
Well, the tour, Sean, is the dark side of Camden, a side of Camden that most people, I would assume, don't know a lot about. They would tend to know about Camden Lock, famous music venues, celebrities, markets, street art, street food, etc. But no one's ever dived into or delved into the dark side of Camden, and there is a very, very dark side of Camden. So I'm a lifelong resident of Camden, and I feel it's my duty to share some of those stories, and in some cases folklore. You'll take what you want from it, but the vast majority of it is true and it is verifiable.
And why is the tour starting out at London St Pancras Station?
Because this is the meeting place for any potential people that want to come along, whether they be individuals or groups. I also cover corporate events, which can be done any time of the day. It's a bespoke opportunity to entertain your clients, or if you wanted to do a team building event. Equally, it could be for stag do's, hen do's, any other do, cover everybody basically. And I do have a facility at the end of the tour where people want to order food in advance. That can be done, and we'll have a drink and we cover some of the areas we might have overlooked, or people want to delve a little bit more.
And all the links for Frank's tour, his book, podcasts, contact will be in the description box below this video on YouTube. Right, so are we starting off here?
We are, and what I'd like to do, Sean, is first of all to say thank you for coming along today. It's been too long since we met up, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity, even if you did pick a bloody hot day, but never mind. What I'll start off with then is I'd like to welcome everybody to the London Borough of Camden, and probably one of the first things I should mention is the London Borough of Camden has only been around since 1965. In fact, it was launched on the 1st of April 1965. What constitutes the London Borough of Camden is 3 boroughs were combined. So in this direction you would have had Holborn, which was an affluent borough, although it did have its poorer parts as well. Where we're standing now would have been the borough of St Pancras, which was a very, very poor borough. And a very rough and very tough borough. And then to the north, which we'll finish up at, would have been the London Borough of Hampstead, which was very affluent. And I don't know if some genius decided to throw us all together, and therefore we'd all be affluent, but it certainly didn't work for the residents of St Pancras, I can assure you. Anyway, some reference to St Pancras Station, named after a martyr, Pancras, who was in Turkey. He was only 14 and he was a member of the Roman army, and he was a Christian, and because of his faith eventually he was taken back to Italy and he was basically killed, and that's how he became a martyr. So if we walk up this way, as I say, we are now technically in Camden, but I still refer to this as St Pancras, partly because I've always lived in what I've known as St Pancras. We have behind us, we have, I will give you some social history as well, apart from some of the more gruesome stories. We do have the British Library. I'm ashamed to say I still haven't been in it yet, but I will get round to it one day. And this is the Sir Francis Crick, or the Francis Crick Centre, known for its science exhibitions and so on. To the left of where we're going now is very, very much St Pancras. There would have been a big market here many, many years ago. As you'll see, it's now all flats. There are new offices here as well. In fact, to a lot of older people, it just would be unrecognisable. But on this corner and beyond was Brill Market. It's been remembered by this street being called Brill Place. A couple of things to point out before we go and talk about our first subject. Up this road is Phoenix Road, and on the left is a very, very interesting museum. It's not been open many years, and it's called the Somers Town Museum. I've done a little bit of voluntary work there, and I intend to do some more in the coming months. Well worth a visit. The Somers Town Festival is coming up next month, and I'm looking forward to attending that. On the right hand side, is the next turning on the right, is a street called Purchase Street, and I shall make reference to that a little bit later during the tour. But our first talk is about this young man, Richard Everett. As I've said before, as I've mentioned, this was a very, very tough area, and if you take into account the first Metropolitan policeman was murdered in this actual area, and his name was Thomas Grantham, and he was killed by two labourers. He was breaking up a fight, basically.
Stand next to him.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. He was killed in a fight with two Irishmen who were fighting themselves. He landed up being kicked to death. In those days, there weren't local courts, so you would use public houses. So local people would almost be judge and jury. It was a very large Irish community here, so they were never going to be found guilty. In fact, the dead police officer, Thomas Grantham, was accused of overexerting his duties. So anyway, the area in general, based on the railways, because you have Euston that way, St Pancras here, and beyond this is King's Cross. You can imagine when that was being built, that had a very large intake of people from Ireland, Scotland, the Midlands, up north. So this area was particularly rough. You know, you had your Irish pubs, your Scots pubs, your Cockney pubs, Scouts, you know. The road just up there, Charlton Street, in the early 70s was one of the top 5 or 6, it was mentioned in the Sunday magazine, one of the top 5 or 6 roughest streets in the UK, and that includes Belfast. We then had the busiest man was the road sweeper, because apparently the amount of glass that he had to sweep up every morning as a result of all the smashed pub windows.
Who was fighting who, Frank?
Anybody and everybody, basically. Very large families. You have to take into account very large families.
So you've got divisions within the communities and also communities against communities?
Well, it was probably Irishmen against Englishmen, against Scotsmen and Scouts, or against Cockney, against Geordie, against Brummie. So you could pick any equation you like, or permutation. So it's pretty. And then you probably even had, you know, it's quite a lot of extensive flats here, old tenements. I dare say one lot of tenements, you know, would fight another tenements, you know, as young people do. So going on that background, the local school, one in particular, Swindon College, was very, very rough. I'd like to thank my mother for sending me there, just because it had a Sir in the title. She thought it was posh. Well, I soon learnt if you fell out with somebody, you know, you had 4 brothers and 15 cousins waiting for you after school. So thanks, Mum, I appreciate that. Anyway, over the years the violence continued around it. It changed definitely quite a lot, because in the 60s, 70s maybe, you had West Indians, more West Indians moved into the area. You then had a lot of Asians that moved, Bangladeshis, Bengalis. Much later there was more of an African population as well. And then you had Somalians, who I know equally are African, but they were quite distinct. And unfortunately, this young man, Richard Everett, was walking down this street with 2 friends, 15 years of age, and earlier in the day, a young Asian had been attacked, and a group of about 15 went looking for revenge. Unfortunately for Richard, he had finished playing football, they were going to get some chips, and they were attacked. Unfortunately, the 2 of them got away, his friends got away. Unfortunately for Richard, he was stabbed with a kitchen knife. The consequence of that, there were arrests. Only 3 people were ever charged. One was done for murder. One, I think, got youth custody. One got away. The rest fled, basically, overseas and have never been arrested since. This area was in turmoil. There was an Asian shop that was firebombed, tit-for-tat attacks on people. Unfortunately for Richard, his family became under so much pressure they had to move out of the area. They actually went to live in Essex. There was a small campaign to get justice for Richard. That was a bit risky because that almost made it sound like you had something against the Asian community. So people were very, very loath to put their heads above the parapet. In fact, the Camden Council was accused of ignoring Richard's family. I'm still in touch with Richard's brother, Danny. As you can see, this has seen better days. Someone has attempted to patch it up, but we've agreed to get some money together and get him a new one. When this is finished, allegedly a bench that was removed by Camden, by the way, they didn't tell anybody they were going to move it, will return at some stage. We'll press them on that. So that's our story of.
And they didn't have cameras on the streets back then, did they? So
no,
they couldn't have recorded it. Now there's cameras everywhere, isn't it?
The actual police officer, Thomas Grantham, was in this. I always assumed it was in Charlton Street because of the amount of pubs, but apparently it was in this street because this wasn't always called Midland Road, and that's another thing we have to take into account. That so many roads have changed. They've just disappeared because of redevelopment. But this area, as I say, because of the railways, had so many industries that thrived because of that. There was a big beer making community here. Not so much the building, storage of it. It would come in from the Midlands in particular. It would be stored here. The coal industry was another industry. And in different parts of Camden, it's also known for piano making. And there are still quite a few locations where that is reflected. But people came back now from 60s, 70s, they would not recognise this. This would have all been railway arches, and various people would make a living, whether it be car mechanics or carpentry. Some of it for storage, but they've all gone. All of that's gone now. And in fairness, beyond this, what goes over onto the Regent's Canal, all around King's Cross, is unbelievable. The amount of restaurants, etc., and various activities. So you get a bit nostalgic about it at times, but for this generation, it's a great place to come and visit.
Yeah, it's a hive of activity. Me and Jen were here recently to get on the Eurostar. Yeah. We went to Amsterdam for her birthday. Yeah.
Well, that's where we're lucky, because where this used to be at Waterloo, although not a million miles away, now it's here to go to places like, we've been to Paris from here, we've been to Bruges. Yeah, it's lovely to have it here. I mean, some of the, for people like a bit of nostalgia, there's some old antique places that are here. How many of them are genuine, I'm not entirely sure. But there's some nice bits of bric-a-brac that people can come along and have a look at or buy. We're going to cross over here now, Sean. What I'm going to do is slightly abridge some of the stories. One, because of the amount of them and the distance that we're going to cover, and plus a little bit of mystery for those that might want to come along at a later stage. I don't want to spoil it for them.
Sounds good.
But I'll give enough. to give you an indication of what's happened in Camden over the years.
Have you got the Amy Winehouse story?
Well, what I try to do, particularly if it's a group that I know that's coming, I try to identify what people might be interested in. For example, a chap came along and I knew in advance he was an architect, so clearly I wanted to point out areas of interest to him. Like if you go to Camden High Street, people look on this level, they don't look above the shops.
Yeah.
So he was fascinated. So I do try and find out if there's somebody musical, and there's inevitably Amy Winehouse always does draw some attention,
Yeah.
There's things, obviously music in general. People, they say, they remember the Camden Palace before it became the music machine that's now, which is now Coco's. So yeah, it depends on your age group, Sean.
Same.
So sometimes I rabbit on about things with people. Go, what's he talking about? How old's he?
So where are we now, Frank?
We're standing outside the old St Pancras Church. So we're in St Pancras Gardens, which also encompasses St Pancras Cemetery, although it's not a cemetery anymore. It was given over to become a park.
Should we go nearest to the door?
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
It's quite a old building, isn't it?
Well, you're not wrong, Sean, because it's attributed as being one of the oldest places of worship in Europe. And there's an argument between it, whether it's the 9th century, the 10th century. The church itself wasn't here, but it was certainly recognised as being an historical place of worship, that's for sure. Something I only found out recently, that during the English Civil War, Cromwell actually had 50 men billeted here, stabled here with their horses. So I wasn't aware of that. I'm going to do some more research in that. Other features of here are things like, I'm not sure how old you are, Sean, but
Same age as you, aren't I?
oh yeah, okay, you remember the Beatles then.
68.
The White Album, if you look at the White Album, you'll see the Beatles sitting on a bench, and that bench, I'm not sure where it is, but it's certainly in there.
Oh wow.
It's in there, yeah. And we also have, if you walk up here, we also have a grave of Mary Wollstonecraft, and she is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And she's buried along here.
Okay.
We've got what was right in the middle there that's now fenced off was a tree, and it stood there for a very, very long time, and it's only recently fallen down. Now, the connection with that tree is that this was all a cemetery, and a firm of architects were brought in to move the stones so that they could use the ground for the railways. And one of the architects, if you want to, yeah, certainly, yeah. And
so how old are some of these gravestones?
They go back a long, long way. And what's happened is the architects didn't know what to do with the stones, so they had a young apprentice working with them. They basically gave him the responsibility.
Hardy tree.
Right. So this young man who instigated, there's the stones, who instigated this, went to go on to become the famous Sir Thomas Hardy, the playwright. And as they say, a lot of people didn't know that. They didn't know that he'd actually been working for a firm of architects.
Wow.
And just came up with this.
Huh.
I say only recently this year, because of the storms, it came down, and apparently they are going to put another tree there, so which I think will please the community. Now, is there anything striking about this mausoleum in front of you? Does it remind you of anything?
No, but it looks Well made.
So the actual shape of it
Yeah?
doesn't remind you of anything?
No.
No, telephone box maybe?
Telephone box.
The old London telephone boxes?
Oh yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a gentleman over there
Yeah. Let's show them.
called Sir John Soane. And Sir John Soane was the architect of the Bank of England. And when his wife died, this is where she was buried.
Oh wow.
And the chap who designed the London phone box had seen this, and that's what inspired him.
Wow.
That's why it's that shape. Giving too many secrets away here. I'm not sure whose is the more grandiose, his or his wife's. I believe that's his there, or just there.
Whew. That looks big.
Yeah, I think that is his. I knew it wasn't far from his wife's. But this was much more expansive. This place. It's only because it was given up to railway land.
It's so quiet and peaceful right now. Does it get a bit dangerous when it gets dark around here?
Depends what type of people use it. You are right in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his. That's his one there. Sir John Soane, as I say, the architect of the Bank of England.
So the architect of the Bank of England is buried in that?
Yeah, yeah. John Soane. And please tell me they haven't blocked that off. They have, haven't they?
Yeah.
Right, so while we're here then we'll take a look at this building here. In this building here, which is now St Pancras Hospital, it used to be basically almshouses, the equivalent of almshouses, or a workhouse more to the point. And in that workhouse was born the first pearly king, Henry Croft. I know the East End like to try and nick him off of us, but he was actually born round here in Somers Town, St Pancras. He was born in there, and he was a municipal road sweeper and rat catcher. And eventually part of the ethos of the pearly king and queens was to look after the costermongers, the stallholders, etc., and rally round together like a cooperative basically. And their actual dress is kind of mocking of the rich. The buttons and the big hat and the feathers is actually kind of mocking the wealthy in some respects. He was buried here. It was the equivalent of a royal funeral as far as the Pearlies were concerned, and there is actual footage on YouTube. The statue, which was only about that high, was getting vandalised, so they removed it and they took it, and it's currently in the crypt of St Martin's in the Fields in Trafalgar Square. If you go into the crypt, you'll see this statue there. This eventually became a hospital, and that's where he died. So yeah, that was the first pearly king, Henry Croft.
Wow.
So we'll move on to our next point of interest.
Where are we now, Frank?
Okay, we're now in Pancras Way, and Pancras Way was the site of a very, very famous robbery. The robbery took place in the building opposite, which was then called the Verizon security depot, basically. Stored lots of information, very sensitive information. No attempt had ever been made to break in, mainly down to the fact that the technology involved was unbelievable in regards to not only the guards and the cameras, optics and all kinds of optical stuff. All kinds of technology was used, basically thought to be impenetrable. equivalents of it in Europe, attempts had been made, it hadn't worked. Basically organised crime, we were trying to retrieve a lot of information that involved mass fraud of investment companies, insurance companies and so on. They needed that information before the shit hit the fan, so to speak. A local man was afforded the task, a man called Terry Ellis, a man who's born in Camden town, just up the road, and he set about breaking into this building. I will give you a few snippets and then leave a little bit to the imagination, but just to let you know, they did actually get away with it. And it was £5 million worth of chips and motherboards that had a value of over £100 million. It was likened to the Ocean's 11 robbery. This was the UK's version of it. I will tell you that police uniforms were involved, an Alsatian dog was involved, and if you come along on another day, I'll explain exactly how it was done.
Oh, look at this alley, Frank.
Well, yes, I can't confess to know if anything has gone on in this valley, in this alleyway, but
looks like something that Jack the Ripper would.
Well, I should imagine the old brasses probably used it over the years. I can imagine that if they couldn't find some accommodation, and I dare say a few people have been mugged as well. We won't frighten the lives out of these good people. So, shall we follow these people? Because in the next street, which is Royal College Street, we have a couple of stories to tell. Two events almost shared the same story. One is a famous, the Camden murder, and the other one is the Camden Ripper. So we are going to walk up this way, but we're going to cross. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. We're going to walk in this road. There lived a woman called Emily Dimmock, sometimes called Phyllis Dimmock, and she became known as the Camden Town Murder. Now, she was a brass, and I'm going to explain in case any of our American viewers don't know what a brass is. Brass is basically a lady of the night, prostitute, whichever you prefer to choose. Locally we would know it as a brass. Brass is Cockney rhyming slang for brass flute, prostitute. So she did have a partner. He used to work quite late at night. She would meet clients. She was last seen in a pub up there on the left hand side called the Eagle, that's changed its name now. She was found naked on her bed, basically with her throat cut. There's an added mystery to it, because in that direction at Mornington Crescent, the actual crescent itself, there's a plaque, and a man lived there called Walter Sickert. Now, Walter Sickert was part of the Camden art group, but Walter Sickert was more than famous in the long run for being a suspect in the Jack the Ripper cases. The police always felt he had a macabre interest in death. Well, one of his paintings depicts a naked woman on a bed with her throat cut.
Wow.
So that's not that well known, that story. Apparently there is a book out now that looks into that far deeper, and I intend getting a copy of that. So that was Phyllis Dimmock. We're now going to cross the road, and we're literally just going to go under those trees. Now, if there are any film buffs, if you have any film buffs on the tour,
Beatles.
and they particularly like Alfred Hitchcock. If you look at the film The Man That Knew Too Much, you will see James Stewart, or Jimmy Stewart as some people prefer to call him, the American actor. You will see him walking across here. into Flinders Street, and he crosses over and he goes into College Place, which wasn't named College Place then, by the way. And you can go on YouTube and you can see. Right. This is the site, these flats of the site of a man who lived here called Thomas Hardy. I beg your pardon, I'm getting me Hardys mixed up here. Anthony Hardy. A big man, had a drink problem, did like his drugs as well. One day it was reported to the police that he'd smashed the door of a neighbour. They came to his door, he denied it, and they asked what was beyond the particular door, which was locked, and they asked for the key, said he couldn't find the key. They found the key eventually, and on the bed was a naked woman, and she was dead. She was a brass, and he was known to frequent the King's Cross area and pick up brasses. So he was so drunk, and he was on drugs, he had psychological problems or psychiatric problems. They called a pathologist in, and he basically said he couldn't have a heart attack. So they took him away, they put him into a mental health hospital, so he was never charged. He was released at the end of that year, and one day, down and out, or down on his luck, was walking along here, and he went to go through the bins to see if there was anything to eat. To his horror, he found two bodies, two dismembered bodies. They were brasses as well. He didn't take the police a lot to figure, you know, what had happened. They couldn't find Anthony Hardy. He'd gone on the missing list. They realised, they got reports from around other parts of London that reports were made of body parts were found in canals, etc. They pretty much put it down to him. They did catch him eventually. Other murders were attributed to him, but they could never question him because he was never of the right state of mind, basically. And he died in prison. He basically died in prison. Right, so that's the story of the Camden Ripper shop.
Wow, that's chilling, isn't it?
Yeah, and we'll now make our way up to Royal College Street.
All right. Right, so we're ensconced in a little park section now.
Right, up until 1889, this would have still been a cemetery, St Martin's Cemetery, and it was an overspill from St Martin's in the Fields, and that might seem a long way away, but there was obviously lots of open ground in those days. There wasn't so much, being built. But in 1889, they decided to put all the stones to one side and make this a public park. And the dignitary that opened it was the Countess of Rosebery. Now earlier I mentioned Purchase Street, and on here there is one Frederick Purchase, who was the chairman of the committee. There is a friend of mine called John Purchase, and he lives in Brighton. That's a direct relative of John, which he didn't know at the time. If you're visiting Brighton at all, John runs a lovely pub called The Quadrant, and I can't promise you a free drink, but maybe mention the park. Anyway, we'll have a walk through. Now. As we walk through, you'll see that the stones have been put to the side. All around the park is the stones that were once here. Because my grandparents lived across the road when I was a child, this is, they bring me over here, and we spend quite a lot of time in here. It's actually not well known, this park, which makes it all the nicer, because it's a little bit of an oasis. you know, from everybody, from the mad side of Camden town, so to speak. As we get round the corner, there used to be a pub, and it was called the St Martin's Tavern, but the locals called it the Bone House. You never said you was going into the St Martin's Tavern. You always said that you went to the talk to us. Yeah, I could have mentioned some other kinds of locals as well. Yeah, so no one ever called it the St Martin's Tavern. They only ever referred to it as the Bone House, because this was once upon a time a cemetery. It's said that some autopsies may have taken place on the site, and also when they was removing the stones, there were so many bones. Folklore says that they actually stored some of those bones somewhere on site, and it became the Bone House forevermore after that. So how true that is, I'm not entirely sure. But this is it. This is the St Martin's Tavern, or as we actually call it, the Bone House. So we're now heading towards Camden High Street. I wonder if we can see, you can't quite see it, where the traffic lights are is a big Greek church. I would assume one of the biggest Greek churches in this country, and I'm sure it was the 60s or the 70s. Archbishop Macarius visited the church because this had a really big Greek community at the time, and it still retains some of the I mean, that's changed all over again, but yeah, if you wanted a piece of Greece in those days, you would come to, you know, Camden Town would be a place that you'd come to, hence the church. I think the only time there was any trouble was when the problems started in Cyprus, you know, with the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. That was a bit uncomfortable locally, and even in school friends suddenly, you know, turned against each other because of the views of their parents. Right, we'll cross over here. In fact, down that way, we're turning on the right hand side. There is two on each corner. There is still a Greek restaurant, and there's actually one up there. There's a Greek restaurant as well. Right, we're coming up to Camden High Street, and in front of us you'll see a pub that's now called the Blues Kitchen, but it used to be the Brighton. The pub was notorious because the Camden Town mob used to drink in there, and this was in the days of the racetrack wars, you know, Derby, Sabini, etc. You know,
Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, the Elephant and Castle mob, Hoxton, all those organised gangs were at it for their piece of turf. Obviously the Brummagents from Birmingham, and this used to be where the Camden Town mob used to congregate. So the likes of you know, Alfred Solomon, etc. That's where they used to drink, in that pub. And just further down towards, if we look that way, towards where these buildings ends is Mornington Crescent, where I said Walter Sickert used to live, the artist. And on the corner there's a pub there now called the Littleton. Well, that was named after Humphrey Littleton, who used to play in the BBC studios. But prior to that it was called the Southampton, and a famous gangsters battle took place there where people appeared in court, and it was from that period of those types of villains.
What, like a shootout?
Oh yeah, stabbings, etc. Yeah, and it involved some very, very prominent people as well. And that was partly the Sabinis again, who ruled all around Saffron Hill in Clerkenwell, and and that part comes under Camden. It still comes, people don't know that because that's the old Holborn area. We're just going to walk up here literally 10 yards.
Where were the Sabinis from originally?
They were Anglo-Italian, but that community was almost completely Italian, and you had people like oh, he's died recently, what did they call him? He was alleged to have worked with the mafia.
The singer?
Battles Rossi. Battles Rossi was from there. A lot of the more Italian, Anglo-Italian villains, that's where they came from. If you just turn this way now, I'm going to make some reference to this bin, which might seem very strange to you. But in 1993, two men placed a bomb in there, in the bin. It's not the same bin, but that's the exact spot. There was a shop here called Athena at the time, and that was Woolworths across the road. What they did was they phoned for a bomb warning, but they told the police that the bomb was outside the KFC. So the police moved everybody in this direction. 18 people were injured, including a child.
Oh no.
The significance to me was my two daughters was in Woolworths at the time.
What?
And they weren't hurt. I hasten to add, they weren't hurt. And the two men were never ever caught for that bomb. I'm trying to think of their names. Patrick Hayes. I'll think of their names after. Anyway, they never got caught. But a couple of months before, there'd been the Harrods bombing, and exactly the same thing was done. A bomb was placed in a bin. And if you look at the video footage, you see that they were dressed like gentlemen. They were dressed very smart. No one's ever been able to work out why you would put a bin in Camden High Street, considering it's famous for its Irish community. There's never been an explanation from them why that's Jan Taylor and Patrick Hayes. That was the name of the two. Yeah, they were never actually charged for that. But yeah, it's a mystery to us. It's a mystery. Anyway, we'll carry on up to Camden High Street. Oh, what's up, darling? You need to get yourself some glasses. Oh, you are getting yourself some glasses. Sorry, darling.
I just go one now.
Yeah, this changes every other week. I'll walk up and there's something different. If you tell people there's a shop up here on the right hand side, it's gone. It's turned into something else. Sometimes there's a few married couples, and there's a cake shop back there, and I say, come on girls, move on, you know, let's not gather here. And then there's a jewellers, and I say to the fellas, quick, grab their arm, you know, move them on. Right, we're headed towards Camden Town Underground Station now.
Isn't there a pub around here called the End of the World?
The World's End.
World's End.
That's exactly where we're going. I'll tell you a little story, well, I'll tell you two stories about the World's End. Right, where's the pub gone? I've not got there yet, I'm a bit premature there.
Should I turn this off for now?
We're just going to go to the next corner.
Okay.
It's up to you if you want to turn it off, but we're just going to the end of the...
Yeah, keep going, it's good. Good to see all the people, I think, for the viewers. Because it is a hive here as well, isn't it?
Oh, blimey. The old building across the road there, the lovely bit of architecture, is the Mother Black Cat. When we were children, that would have been the only pub we knew that catered for gay men. And apparently they used to have great cabaret in there. Really great cabaret. It's been shut for years. And I'm surprised because it's such an iconic building, but historical for the gay community. I find it really strange that collectively that they've not managed to open that up. There's not even a plaque. There's not even a plaque there to mention it. Of course, that we as locals, we do know the history of it. That used to be a big pub on the corner there, the Britannia, which is a bit of a giveaway because up there there's obviously a statue of Britannia. and this is called Britannia Junction. Right, so we're at the World's End now, and the simple explanation about the World's End is that the man that bought it had a pub in Chelsea called the World's End. This used to be called the Mother Red Cap, and the 31 bus used to go from Chelsea and come through here and go to Chalk Farm. So he kind of sold the vision. You can get on a 31 bus and you can go from one end of the world to the other. hence the World's End.
I had no idea that's why it was called
the
that.
World's End. And the real story behind it is old Mother Red Cap. Now the old signage used to show an old witch, and she used to wear a red cap, and they used to say, because she had such bad hair, she was losing her hair. Her name was Jenny, or sometimes they called her Ginny Bingham. Both of her parents were hung for witchcraft, so it was in the blood. She used to make up potions. Now some of her own acquaintances, lovers, landed up dead, and she'd bury them, she'd burn them in a furnace. Eventually they realised what she was up to, and she used to live in a cottage just across there. And when they went round, they found her dead. They found a bottle of one of her potions, and the cat was there. And this is folklore, I'm sure. They gave the cat some of the lotion. Apparently it died instantly and its hair started to fall out. So I think that's a little bit too much. But something else significant about that street, that street there, Bayham Street, was that Charles Dickens lived in that street when he was a young man.
Oh wow.
So the crossover. I mean, there are things we could go on all that. Up there on the right hand side you've got the Dublin Castle, obviously, the history of, you know, Madness and God knows how many other bands. But again, if I know someone is particularly, you know, musically orientated, or they ask, oh, is this where you know, Madness came from, or the Libertines, and we say, yeah. I mean, God, I see so many bands around here over the years. You know, 70s, even late 60s in the Roundhouse. You know, I see so many famous bands. This is having to be renovated or even replaced, because it's the amount of people that pass through here over a weekend is unbelievable.
Staggering, isn't it?
At times they shut it. They just can't take the body of people involved.
Quite quiet right now compared to I've seen it sometimes.
Oh, blimey, yeah, this is quiet. We will touch on Camden, you know, further going towards Camden Lock. It's obviously going to get a bit busier. This is a fascinating shop here on the left-hand side. Now they call it the British Boot Company. When we were younger, we used to call it Holt's. It was called Holt's. And this is where we came. This is where we came in the late 60s, 70s to get our Dr. Martens, to get our brogues, Salatios, you know, the shoes with the tassels on, smooths, and the family is still here.
Lasted.
When I've had people gathered outside and they're taking photos, he's actually come out and he's told us a little bit of story about the family, which has been nice.
Someone just gave us a look then.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So you can keep that on, because we've got a couple of stories coming up here. We're now starting the Kentish Town Road, so this is starting to become going towards Kentish Town as opposed to Camden Town now. It's made up of three towns: Somers Town, Camden Town, and Kentish Town. Yeah, when TVAM used to be up here and it became MTV, I remember there was the band King. Lead singer was called Paul King. Love and Pride was probably their most popular single, and they all went in there and they all bought different coloured Dr. Martin boots. Because I actually spoke to them, because I used to go around there quite a lot, because I used to drink in the pub on the corner, and you got to meet a lot of the technicians and some of the presenters, Chris Tarrant, Anne Diamond, John Stapleton. They used to think I worked in there basically, because I was always in the pub. Right, we'll find a bit of shade here, and we'll have a few more stories. What this was famous for years ago was the Irish community. This is where they would be picked up to find work. The Vans, Murphys, Laveries, etc. would pull up in here or along here, and the men would queue to find work for the day, and they would literally get in the vans sort of 6, half 6 in the morning, go out work all day, come back, fall into the pubs. And then at the back here, we'll see it at the moment, there's called Arlington House, which is a routing house, which is we'd call it the DOS house. You paid whatever it was and you got a room for the night. It was very basic. This building here is now Sainsbury's, but it used to be the ABC. The whole of that was the ABC, which stood for the Aerated Bread Company. Now, the Aerated Bread Company was quite revolutionary because they found a way of putting air into the bread, so it expanded it. It made it look bigger, basically. And even my mother worked in there, so if you never had a dinner, you always had a cake. You at least let you have a cake for your tea, or your dinner. But what it's also now famous for was that end of it that backs onto the canal. When you watch Peaky Blinders, you will see that they give reference to one Alfie Solomons. Well, he wasn't called Alfie Solomons, he was called Alfred Solomon. You'll also see that he has the famous Jewish locks. That isn't right. He wasn't a practicing Jew. In fact, he was known for being a very, very smart man. In his clothing. He was very much. Trying to think of the term that they use. Either way, he wasn't a practicing Jew. He certainly didn't dress.
So was he a non-practicing Jew?
Yes, I'm trying to think of the specific word. Anyway, where they mention it in the programme, when they show you the boats coming down from Birmingham, etc., he had an illicit distillery in the basement of that building.
Wow.
So that much is true.
Wow.
And he was secular, is the word I was looking for. He was a secular Jew. He acknowledged he was Jewish, he just never practiced it. He was a secular Jew.
What was his true demise?
That's a good story, that. He wasn't killed. He did die of natural causes. He did get away with a shooting that took place in King's Cross. And that was the head of the Brummagens, that was the head of the Birmingham gang, who you see in Peaky Blinders. He actually did shoot him.
Wow.
But he got off with that. He got off with that. So yeah, that's the association with what used to be the old ABC building. We've only got to cross the road here for our next story. On Maybank holiday, 1993, 2 men were arrested in Birmingham in a pub car park. And one of them was caught putting 7 handguns and 240 rounds of ammunition into the other person's boot of their car. A third man was arrested the next day, but he was eventually released after 6 weeks. They couldn't prove that he knew what was in the bag, despite the bag had been in his possession the Saturday before. So it was clear there was one person in particular they wanted to arrest, and knew that he would respond, and he would in fact take the bag himself on the Monday. Those 2 were found guilty. One got 2.5 years. Thanks to that, the other one only got 5. He was looking at 10 to 14 years. He was the schoolkeeper at this school, which is this is shut down. Our new school's been built further down the road. He was the schoolkeeper here, and the last he was heard of he was doing a walking tour around Camden. So should we move on? So we're back on, and if you see there, that's Arlington House. That's massive. That's the local DOS house. They used to say that the Irish fellas would, at the weekend, they would buy a suit. They'd buy a new suit. They would work in it. They would work in it all week, so there's not a lot left of it. So when they finish work, straight in the pub, including this one, the Buck's Head. Just round the corner, and every pub round it was an Irish pub. There was, which is crazy because once upon a time Irishmen weren't allowed to be licensees of pubs, and I never knew that.
No, don't put it on.
Who's put the fucking
So yes, you will get a lot busier now, Sean. And the reason I want to come this way because I want to point a plaque out.
Getting a bit busier now.
Oh yeah, well we'll turn off from this. We'll get away from this. Some of us used to drink in the pub on the corner of the Elephant's Head, and we'd be a bit of a novelty for the tourists because they'd never met a Londoner. It'd be quite funny. Right, we have a blue plaque up there, 257, and that is Tom Sayers, the famous pugilist, and he died there basically, and he was a champion bare knuckle fighter. I only spotted that on the top deck of a bus one day as I was going by. So again, I'm not sure how many people actually know that he lived there. Yeah, that would have been an Irish pub. The Elephant's Head takes its name from, I'll just have a walk this way just so you can catch the building. Well, actually we'll be at the back of the building. So we could be in the shade here. That red brick building at the end, we'll come round the back of it afterwards, was the Elephant's Head Brewery. So they decided to spread their wares and basically buy a pub. Hence the Elephant's Head. So the reason we're standing here, because that's a lovely fish and chip shop now, Poppy's Fish and Chip Shop. But years ago, it became famous for a double suicide.
Ooh.
And the two gentlemen involved, I'm not going to give it away, the two gentlemen involved was a Samuel Furness, which had a very ironic name, because there was a body found burnt, and another chap called, he was Samuel Furness, the other fella will come to me in a minute. Walter Spratchett was his name, Walter Spratchett. The man was found in a burnt out workman's shed, and the police basically put it down to suicide. They said he committed suicide. And they found a note, a suicide note. Now the first thing that would strike me is, why would you write a suicide note and then start a fire? Surely it would burn. They did a second autopsy, found out the teeth couldn't have fitted a man of that age, and they actually found a couple of bullet holes as well the second time round. Anyway, they did go on to arrest somebody, they say he threw the gun in the canal at the back here. He was taken to Kentish Town Police Station, which we'll pass at some stage. But what he did under arrest was, in the lapel of his overcoat, he had poison. So he committed suicide. Ooh. So the same man committed suicide twice. But I'll explain another time which one it was and what the exact circumstances were. Over here. Yeah, we'll get away from this. It's a bit too busy for my liking. That was TV and that old building there. TV and then it became MTV. When we get on the brow, we'll turn right and walk along the canal.
So all this is Camden High Street shops, is it?
This is now Camden Lock.
Camden Lock.
This is now Camden Lock, the famous lock. The old Dingwall music venues. Was across the road. Oh, the old Tank Criers here. Yeah, see on the bridge, got Camden Lock.
That's nice.
That's Camden Lock, and down there is Hawley Lock. Okay. Let's get you involved. You just take off. This is our town crier. I'm not sure if he's a Cornish man. I'm not sure if he's Devon, Cornwall.
Are we going to ask him, Frank?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, it's nice to meet someone fatter than me anyway. It's made my day. He's definitely got a West Country accent, hasn't he? Find out. I'm trying to listen in there.
Drop you away tomorrow, yeah?
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir. I'm just trying to ascertain what part of the country you hail from.
I'm a Gloucestershire man.
I rolled out, got it wrong.
Born and bred, long in the arm and thick in the head.
I said he's either Somerset, Devon,
Well,
Cornwall,
I did a little
Dorset.
bit of time in Exeter at one time.
What prison was that?
No. I went to boarding school down
I've
there.
been a bit cynical. Oh yeah,
Oh, that's
boarding.
all right,
Is that
yeah,
what
yeah.
they called it there? Boarding school.
Boarding school, yes,
It was a boarding
I
school.
was sent away as a child, yeah.
As long as you weren't sent away as an adult.
Hey?
I said as long as you wasn't sent away as an adult.
No. Nearly got there. Nearly got there.
Nearly got there.
So Gloucester board, Gloucester bed.
Right.
You know, the best Lord Mayor you ever had in London was Dick Whittington. And he came from Gloucester. And he had a magical pussy. And I'm a town crier and I'm still looking for mine.
There's a lot of women claim that. Anyway, lovely to see you, sir.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
How are you?
Love a little walk along here, keep the camera down, give people a bit of a feel, and then I'll just mention a little story about the canal here. Fine, thanks, Doug. Live eaters, aren't they? This is as new to me as it is to you. This is just warehouses. Old warehouses. Just go down to this lock here. Go through that entrance, turn left, you have the Hawley Arms, and that's where Amy Winehouse used to drink.
Oh,
That was one of the pubs.
what's it called?
Hawley Arms.
Hawley Arms.
Yeah, so a lot of people make their way to there, Hawley Arms.
Bet we do.
So that's Camden Lock, and this is known as Hawley Lock, and that's Hawley Road. Now, on the night that Ronnie Cray shot George Cornell, there was a Luger gun involved. No one ever asked what happened to the gun. Now, whether it's a rumour, whether it's folklore, the man given the responsibility of getting rid of the gun was a man called Charlie or Nobby Clark, and it's said that he dumped the gun in the Holy Lock. Whether it's that point of it, that point of it down here. But again, that's never been substantiated. By the same token, no one's ever said what did happen to it. That's quite possible because he worked. He was a cat burglar, and he worked for the Crays. So it would make sense. It would make sense that happened. Mentioned the Elephant's Head Brewery, and that's the red brick building there. That's the rear of that. And this now takes us back on the continuation of Kentish Town Road. Once the two students bought the house that she lived in, and apparently it was.
Who had a house down here?
Amy Winehouse. It was in the local newspaper that two students had purchased her house, which I'm not sure how many people. I dare say her fans knew, but I certainly didn't know that she lived along here, Prowse Place. But, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn right into Ivor Street, which is it's a picturesque little street, you know, tucked away at the back of Kentish Town, and I would imagine a lot of people couldn't imagine what took place here years ago.
Not Dennis Nilsen.
No, you've jumped the gun there.
Oh.
Jumped the gun there, Mr. Atwood. He's the next one. he wasn't far off.
How fascinating.
He wasn't far off. Now we have a house up here, number 2. I'm waiting for those that live here to come out one day, because I'm usually on the other side of the road with a group of people, and I think they might think I'm an estate agent trying to sell their house. I never know whether I should knock on their door and tell them what I'm doing. Maybe they don't know themselves.
I know.
So I don't want to give them nightmares. So maybe it's this house here.
This one?
Number 2, and then maybe we'll walk on to
Number 2. What's happened here?
Right. In this house lived Frank, Phoebe, and Tiggy Hogg. And Tiggy was basically a newborn baby.
Uh-oh.
Now Frank went to work one day. The neighbours said that they heard some form of argument going on, and a woman called Mary Piercy, I beg your pardon, was seen leaving the house. Frank came home from work. There's no sign of his wife, of his baby. So he informed the local police. Well, you know why? And a search went up, and basically Phoebe was found with her head caved in, going up towards Hampstead. At a later stage, the pram was found. Baby had a pillow over its head, but it had also been battered as well.
Oh, this is dark, Frank.
So they went looking for Mary Piercy, and went to her house. And in the house, they found a fireplace poker, and it had blood and matted hair on it. And her mitigating circumstances was that she'd had a mice infestation, and she used this poker to kill the mice. No mention of killing a mother and child. Subsequently, she was arrested and she was charged, and basically she was hanged.
Ooh.
She was hanged, yeah. So I don't know how much the residents of that lovely little house know about that, but maybe I'll leave them in their ignorance for the time being. So
horrific.
Yeah, not nice at all. Nothing Nothing much to mention probably. Well, there's a couple of little bits up here I suppose we could mention. There's a pub, well it's not a pub anymore, it's apartments now. You can see the sign.
The Black Horse.
The Black Horse. In the 30s, that's where the local black shirts used to meet and drink. For those that don't know, the black shirts, well, they were followers of Sir Oswald Mosley, who led the fascist movement leading up to the Second World War. In fact, Kentish Town Road, there was a famous march from Islip Street that went down to Parliament Square, and that's on Pathé News somewhere. But this is where some of theirs, certainly the local members, used to meet in this pub. Right, we'll cross over here. This used to be Sir Richard of Chichester Catholic School, and it's the school my young lady used to go to. So we both went to school with Sir in it. The building at the end was very famous. It was Dunn & Company, and they were famous for hats. That was the main thing, was hats. Other forms of gentlemen's wear as well, but mainly hats. Again, I suppose these big companies move on eventually, but they were certainly famous for it. The red brick building that we're coming up to on the left used to be called Kentish Town South Underground Station. I am 66 years of age and I've never seen that station open. No. In fact, I will look it up to see when it was closed. But no, I've never seen it open in 60 odd years. That was meant to be the station between Kentish Town and Camden Town. Well, you can see their Creation Studios. That used to be toilets, and it got converted into a wine bar, and then got created into Creation Recording Studios. And I say to people, I had a word with the sound engineer the other day, having a few problems in there. The musicians are having trouble getting an A, B, C, D, E, F or a G, but we've got no problem getting a P. Anyway, we'll cut that.
Isn't that the kind of toilets George Michael used to hang out in?
We passed them.
Did we?
Yeah, we passed them. That was the old Castle pub on the corner. Trying to think of the name of Nelson's. Who was Nelson's partner? I'll think of the name in a minute. She lived in there, Kelly Street. She was almost a down and out. Not necessarily the same two trees, but there's been two trees here, and they were allegedly planted to remember them. We're right into Kentish Town. This is a Greek church. It's been there some years now, because it was that when I was a child. The irony of here, Kentish Town Road, considering how many pubs I've drunk along here over the years, I don't see one person I know really strange.
The thing that makes it
We are coming up to a site that's associated with Dennis Nilsen. Now, past these people, if you fancy doing a bit of pottery and having a drink, having your own drink. Very popular. I mean, my pottery wouldn't be good before I had a drink. I was getting to think what it looked like after I've had a juice now. Yeah, Dennis Nilsen had been in the army, joined the police force briefly. He lived in Muswell Hill, but he worked here in Kentish Town Road, in the job centre. Now he was known as the kindly killer. And what he would do, he would go out of an evening and he'd frequent places where there were gay men, or sometimes down and out. People who generally didn't have a bed for the night, so they were easy prey to the promise of some food, a hot drink, or even out, or alcohol. So he would invite them back and entertain them, and then sometimes he'd have sex with them. He invariably landed up killing them. He'd drown people, he'd poisoned people. His problem was he had to get rid of the people. He had to get rid of the bodies. So he started to cut them up. He started to dismember them and put them in the fridge, or he put them in pots on the stove. Now eventually he'd start to flush them down the toilet. Now, say this took place in Muswell Hill, further up in North London, and eventually the drains blocked and neighbours complained, and they discovered the bodies. They're still not sure. They say this is it now. This is the actual job centre.
Oh, this is the job centre where Nilsen worked.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
This is where they arrested him.
This is where they arrested him.
Yeah, as far as I was told, that's where he was arrested.
Wow.
And they're still not sure. They're still not sure of the total. If he'd been sentenced to 12 murders, they're still not sure how many exactly it was, because they can't account for what was flushed away. And equally, people, especially the down and outs, don't tend to get reported missing.
No family members, nothing.
No family members, no.
Wondering where they are.
So be careful. You want to look for a job. Be careful who you speak to, especially if they offer you a bed for the night. Right.
So where are we now, Frank?
We are in Holmes Road, Kentish Town. Actually, Kentish Town Road itself. If you were to continue up Kentish Town Road, you would come to Hilldrop Crescent. Hilldrop Crescent is famous for Dr. Crippen. Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen, who was an American citizen, and his wife Cora came to this country. She had big ideas, his wife. Unfortunately for him, although he was called a doctor, he didn't qualify as a practicing doctor here. He could be a pharmacist. He couldn't actually treat people. This was a big disappointment to his wife. She used to frequent the old Bedford Theatre in Camden High Street, lots of arty friends, and loved to invite them back for dinner and basically ridicule him. And he suffered this for some while. Eventually he went and got a job in an office. He had a secretary, and they basically started an affair. Cora went missing. He gave the story that she'd gone back to America. She had a relation that was ill. Her friends weren't having it because they'd said she would have informed them. He goes out, the police investigate him, and they decide they've got no charges. The friends still aren't having it. There's something wrong. The inspector's not having it. And eventually, Dr. Crippen goes and buys some boys' clothes, because his mistress is a very small woman, and dresses her up. They disappear. And they go down to the docks and they get on the HMS Montrose and they sail to Canada. Now, for the first time ever, there was a Marconi radio. Oh no, SS it might have been, not HMS, SS. Montrose. And the captain becomes suspicious. They're a little bit touchy-feely for father and son. So he uses this radio. It's the first time a radio's been used from sea back onto land. Consequently, they land up in Canada and the police are waiting for them. Instantly arrested. They come back. They find the wife, Cora, buried in the basement in lime and various other things. And originally they say she's been poisoned because she's been purchasing poisons. but they also say there's a mark that they believe was a bullet wound. There was a telltale scar, which they say might have been where she'd had a previous operation. So they wasn't even sure whether it was her at some stage. It's been proven since that it was. But the cause of death, they're not sure about the bullet. Anyway, consequently, he was taken to the Old Bailey, and he was then taken to Pentonville Prison in Islington, hung, and then he hanged, and then he had a pauper's grave.
Wow.
He's still there. She got away. She got away with it. The mistress, because they just said she was an innocent party. She didn't know that she was being led, and they certainly didn't believe that she took any part in murder.
Wow.
If you carry on beyond here, you'll get to Highgate, which is still the London Borough of Camden. And in Highgate, you will find Bruce Reynolds, the famous robbery, the Great Train Robbery. No connection with Camden as far as I'm aware. Certainly wasn't born here, but he is actually buried in Highgate Cemetery. A villain that is well known and was born in Camden, or St Pancras to be precise, was Billy Hill. And Billy Hill was basically attributed as being the king of the London underworld in the times of Jack Spot. And
what era was that?
well, he kind of went on from the 40s, 50s and into the 60s. And it's amazing, since we doing research on him, the amount of people that now know him.
So London had one, like, the Godfather at that time.
At that time, that was him. That was Billy Hill.
Wow.
It was Billy. It was that he's attributed.
And what was his revenue sources?
Of everything.
Everything.
Of everything, pretty much. He was clever. He did time more than once, but was a very, very good businessman. And yeah, his biggest rival probably would have been. He was very good at waiting for feuds to take place and one person take another person out and then move into the space.
Right.
Even give the other person the impression he was an ally.
Right.
Knowing full well that he'd get rid of them as well at some stage. So yeah, so that's what he was. Hello. Do you know what? I said before he put that camera on, every time I walk up Kentish Town Road, I'll never see him again.
How are you?
And I'm sure my young lady Lisa, it's lovely to see you.
Yeah.
You all right?
Brilliant.
Lovely.
I got the all clear from cancer after 7.5 years.
Oh yeah,
of Christmas.
fantastic. Another one. Hello.
Lovely to see you.
You
Looking
too.
really
Oh,
well.
lovely. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Righto, Sean. We'll just have a quick walk down here. And that was sort of what I did that, wasn't it?
Should I turn it off for now?
We just walked past the police station.
Oh, okay. What police station is this, Frank?
Kentish Town police station.
Okay.
And this is the station that Terry Ellis, the mastermind of the Verizon robbery, this is where he was brought back to.
Right.
Kentish Town police station. And also the double suicide, which I haven't let on who was who, but the guilty party was also brought back
Wow.
to Kentish Town police station. And in my youth, I have to say I've been in there more than once as well, so we won't go down that road. Mainly for football, offences. Yes,
So where are we now, Frank?
we're on the corner of Grafton Road in Gospel Oak, which is a posh bit of Kentish Town. My wife says she lives in Gospel Oak, I say I live in Kentish Town. And I'm standing at a memorial mural to young Calvin Bungisa. Calvin's family came from the Congo to avoid violence for a safer life here in London, and unfortunately for him, he did get caught up in the gang culture which was rife at the time. There'd been numerous stabbings and even shootings. He was lured to this corner here. I believe it was by a girl, a phone call from a girl. He was with a friend. a stolen car pulled up. 4 men all dressed in black, disembarked, chased him. The friends got away. He tripped in the road on the corner here, and they basically set about him with machetes and other weapons. They never caught the attackers. They were thought to have been Somalians from Agar Grove, which was a rival gang to the QC, which is from Queen's Crescent Market. A £10,000 reward was put up, but they've never actually caught them. The rumour is that they're either in prison for other things that they've done, or they themselves have been killed in later battles that have taken back. So there's the irony there. Poor young man comes from the Congo to avoid violence, and meets his death here. I got up in the morning, across the road, there was a tent there. A lady from LBC approached me, and I wasn't even aware, because it had happened late the night before. And she just asked me a little bit about the local area, and I said it had always been rough around here, working class area, but not to that extent. It was almost common, Yeah, so that's the story of this young man.
Hampstead Heath, Frank.
Yes, we're now at one of the entrances to the Hampstead Heath, a wide expanse of heath that's also joined by Parliament Hill Fields, which has the famous Parliament Hill that looks out across London, and where you could see the Houses of Parliament basically. The place that's the person that's probably most famous with Hampstead Heath, what it's mainly famous for, I suppose, is the fair. Hampstead Fair. There's 2 fairs. There used to be one at this end and there's one further up. The posh people used to use the one at the top, poor people used to use the one at the bottom. Also famous for Hampstead Heath, your teeth. But probably the most famous thing of all is, I would say, is Dick Turpin. When we grew up as kids, we were always relayed the story of Dick Turpin and how he used to rob, famous highwayman. And there's a bridge, the Red Arches bridges, and he allegedly used to hide from the police. How they didn't see him, I've got no idea, especially if he had a horse with him. And allegedly hid some of his loot as well. Well, that myth has been picked to pieces a little bit, because he was actually a member of a gang in Essex, some way from Hampstead Heath. And he could have rode through at different times, it's not impossible. But he shot one of his own gang accidentally, and he had to go on the run. And this is where the infamous story, whereas he rode to York through the night on his famous steed, Black Bess. Well, if you go on a quiz show and you're asked that question, you're going to say Black Bess. That's it, that's been accepted. There's just a problem with that version of events. I can't see me in there.
It's all right, it's power saving.
Just making sure,
yeah.
Okay. And what in fact happened was, nearly 100 years later, somebody wrote a book. And Dick Turpin had become similar to an earlier Robin Hood figure. There were plays performed about him, books written about him, and so on. Robbing from the rich to look after the poor. He didn't do that. He looked after himself. And the fact of the matter is, the book was written nearly 100 years later, and it was in fact the author that named the horse Black Bess. It wasn't true. Never called Black Bess. He did flee to York. He did go back to one of his old habits of rustling horses. He was eventually caught rustling horses. He was put in York prison. He sent some information out, and it was intercepted, and the local magistrates realised who he was, because he'd been using a false name, and it consequently appeared in court, and he was hanged. Ooh. So that's the truer account. So although we were kids and we used to come over here and think we was Dick Turpin, or we were the people trying to capture him, the likelihood of him really passing this way is strong in it, to say the least. The other connection, which is a far worse and very true connection with Hampstead Heath, was in the 80s a series of sexual assaults started taking place here, and unfortunately that led to murder. That eventually led to murder. 2 local men, both went to the same school in Chalk Farm, John Duffy and David Mulcahy, started to sexually assault women. That went on to rape women. That they became known as the railway rapists, because it was in proximity of railway stations, in this case Hampstead Heath Overground Station. On one occasion, one of the victims, David Mulcahy, thought that she had seen him, so he strangled her with her cardigan. A bit like the craze, once one had committed a murder, it was almost incumbent on the other one to commit a murder, so John Duffy himself did. They went on like this for some considerable time. I'll give you the short version. John Duffy was eventually caught. Very sadistic, horrible man. Used to even rape his own wife. I mean, it was a really horrible, nasty piece of work. And he was caught, and he was done for some of the murders, some of the rapes. 10 years later, he was talking to a woman in the prison, like a psychologist, and he said, "Oh, you do know they never ever caught my partner." So eventually, after all that time, he mentioned Mulcahy. Mulcahy had since married and had children. He was arrested, and these 2 friends that had stuck by each other for all these years finally were on opposing sides, and that got another murder on John Duffy's plate, and some additional rapes. And you famous?
Yeah, we are.
Make out you're a girl band or something, we'll promote you. Go on.
We are famous.
Who are you?
Who are you? Come on.
So, Sophia and Rihanna,
Yeah?
we're a famous band. We won Britain Got Talent in 2018.
Sweet.
Yeah, I play the drums. Yeah.
No way.
She plays
Oh my
the accordion.
goodness.
I do, yeah. And I sing.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, pleased to meet you.
Please to
Yeah.
meet you too. What you guys
Don't worry, I'm not paying you.
This is
I'm not paying you. I'll just give you a
Oh,
card.
great.
Frank is doing a true
I
crime
mean, some money would
tour.
have been better. Wait, I guess I'll take the business card. Where do you go around?
All from Camden, from St Pancras Station, and it's the dark side of Camden. Not all the bits you like, Camden Lock, all the art and the foods and the music venues, it's all been done before.
The quirky bits.
This is the dark side, all the rapes, murders, witchcraft, etc. So,
Well, I love a bit of witchcraft. Well,
I'm tempted to say you're a female, so you...
Oh,
shove me in the water now and see if I
don't-
drown.
I don't want the tour to come to an end and the council chase me off the streets. Oh, it's lovely to meet you anyway. Where are you off to all now? You're all going...
Yeah, we just up there to meet our friends.
I say you're going to a practice because you're in this famous band.
Oh, sorry, yeah, we are. We're going to perform off in the
I think
O2.
we debunked that myth.
We're on our way now. We've got like 200,000 people booked out. We've got some water in the bag to keep us hydrated.
Oh, I lovely to see you. Enjoy the rest of it.
yeah, have a good day. Cheers. Bye. You got gate crashed, Frank.
Yeah, yeah. Right, shall we move on just round the corner?
Yep, so there's one final story around the corner.
I think there's more chance of me and you being a boy band. Right, yeah, I've only got to just go up here now.
That'll be the bit that gets the comments going in the...
Yeah. Chaz and Dave meet famous girl band. Trouble is, poor Chaz is dead. Right, our final destination. The famous Magdala.
Magdala.
The Magdala.
Oh, this pub.
Yes.
The Magdala.
Right. See if we can get a bit of peace here. Right. We good to go?
Yeah, it's going.
Right, we are now at the Magdala pub, and on Easter Sunday 1955 a taxi pulled up across the road and a lady called Ruth Ellis stepped out of the taxi. At the same time, her lover David Blakely exited the pub. As he went to walk down here, she came between the cars, pulled out a gun, and she fired 6 shots. 4 of the shots hit Blakely, 1 went into the floor, and 1 took off a thumb or a finger, it's not been confirmed, of a woman who was standby. So 6 shots were fired. So now I'm going to show you something which has caused some conversation over the years.
Oh. Wow.
These are allegedly bullet holes.
Yeah.
When in fact, the Irish landlady, who was in charge here years ago, decided to come down in the middle of the night with a drill the hole in the walls to keep the tourists happy. So you'll hear stories of people say, oh yeah, if you go to the pub you can see the bullet holes in the wall.
Like the Craze pub.
Load of old rubbish. Load of old rubbish. A little bit about Ruth Ellis. She was from Rhyl in North Wales. She'd been abused as a young girl by her father. Her sister was actually raped by her father. The mother wouldn't believe it and was actually pregnant. It was time for Ruth to leave. She did. She came to the bright lights of London. She worked in a club as a hostess. Hostess is a bit much. It's a bit of a posh word for a brass. She wasn't an out-and-out brass, but she did like the company of men that would spend money on her. Unfortunately for her, she'd left a violent environment and had walked straight back into another one, because every man she met was violent. Big drinkers, big egos, and so on. She was pregnant at some stage. One of them punched her in the stomach and she lost the baby. David Blakely was about to leave her. She went looking for him at an address in Tasker Road. They said he wasn't there. She then made her way here. She was arrested afterwards. In fairness to her, she didn't say where she got the taxi from. She didn't say where she got the gun from. Ironically, she had another lover who just happened to own a taxi and owned a gun. But in fairness to her, she didn't say anything. She was taken to Holloway Women's Prison. It's generally agreed she didn't even really defend herself. She didn't even, despite the fact she had children of her own, she didn't actually defend herself. There was kind of an inevitability about her dying, and it's generally accepted now that social workers, barristers and so on, there's no way, for the amount of mitigating circumstances that she had, you know, growing up, etc., where, you know, the conditions and so on, and the way she'd been treated by men, she'd have got done for manslaughter at most, and got a very small sentence. But she was eventually hanged, and there are still some mysteries outstanding. But there's no mystery about those holes in the walls. They are definitely drill holes, and that's it. That's the conclusion of our tour, the dark side of Camden.
Thank you, Frank. It's been absolutely fascinating. What is the name of? What is the website? Do you have a website?
It is www.thedarksideofcamden.uk.
Okay,
and all the information's on there.
And we'll put all the links for that in the description box below this video, and anyone can click down and go on and book this. And is it available all year round?
It will be. It will be. It's currently at weekends. It will expand to days in the week eventually. I will stress again that if people want to use it as a corporate event, as team building or entertaining their clients, that's a bespoke tour can be arranged. Individuals, I meet people from all over the world, all different characters, and there's bits I've left out basically because I don't want to give it all in one go. There's bits of humour we have along the way, some other social history, but we've been going now for about 2.25 hours, so I've nearly walked the legs off the shop.
How much advance notice do you need if someone wants to book it?
If you go on there, it will tell you the dates that are available. If people email me, it's probably better because then we can make it more of a bespoke tour for them, as opposed to them being held to 10 o'clock, because it's usually 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. And when we finish up, if they want to, we go back to a pub, the George, nice big pub, know the staff in there, and we have a few drinks, and you know, we carry on the conversation. And sometimes we have a surprise guest, someone we've previously spoken about, you know, during the tour. So yeah, so Sean, glad to catch up with you again. Always a pleasure. And
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks very much
Appreciate
for the opportunity
your time. Cheers.
and supporting the project.
All right.